So, welcome to Talk Through Walls with Walk Through Walls. Gary Sambrook, how are you?
I'm very good, how are you?
And my name is Simon Evans. I'm well too, thanks for asking. You were about to ask. So, topic for this one is Angela Rayner's suspension from the Unite Union and the possible ramifications and what that could mean for the heart and soul of the Labour Party. Quite a big topic. They're in government, but it's not going entirely according to plan. So what do you make of it? First of all, what do you make of Angela Rayner being suspended by a union?
Well, I think it's big news really, because if you think about the history of the Labour Party, the history of trade unions, the two of them have gone step by step, hand in glove. They're two organisations which are basically the same movement, and they always consider themselves to be a movement. So this is quite a pivotal moment in that relationship. Whether it breaks down forever, I doubt it, because they are so stringently linked. Is it a bit of localised difficulty in Birmingham, which seems to be the reason behind it at the moment, because of the binge strike in Birmingham? That's obviously at the heart of it. So that can be overcome, that can be forgotten about in time. So that relationship is there, it's lasted, decades, 100 years, and it's all about how they influence each other. Because the Labour Party and the trade unions, if you want to try and influence the trade unions, you've got to get into the Labour Party. If you want to try and influence the Labour Party, you've got to try and influence the trade unions. They're absolutely stringently linked. And so this is big news. And how long it's big news for, we don't know, because these things know how to heal themselves. But I reckon this is an opportunity for so many people to wake up a little bit, step back, reflect on what's going on, and then see how the next opportunities come along in the future.
Yeah, you say that you think it could just be a localised issue and then a bit of national rippling and then move on. However, what with other things happening on the political landscape, you've got Nigel Farage going from strength to strength, you've got Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana breaking away from the Labour Party to do something harder left on the political spectrum. So actually what I see here, maybe I'm wrong, you'll correct me if you think I am, but you've got the Tory party and the Labour Party sort of becoming this uni-party centrist mash of can you just swap the names around and you pretty much get something similar no matter who you vote for. And I think voters are becoming pretty disenfranchised. And could this be the sort of first domino in a whole line of dominoes to fall? And actually it could result in possibly something more seismic and longer lasting.
Definitely, and I think there is definitely that uni-party label, which has become quite popular in recent months, is definitely starting to gain traction, and a lot of people are starting to get frustrated with that sort of centrist attitude, establishment attitude. Where's the difference between the two main parties? And you have noticed that in terms of the electorate, there's definitely been a widening of the gap where people on the left and right are looking for alternatives away from the traditional parties to look at who's going to represent them. And the left has just got as many challenges as the right does with reform, and as all things, politics is actually like a horseshoe shape rather than a linear line, because the two things do tend to meet in the middle on some particular issues. So reform are a challenge to both Labour and Conservatives in terms of their voter base. So this is a proper realignment that we're seeing at the moment over a period of time, and eventually that has to catch up on the trade union side now. Do they try and stay in place and work with the Labour Party and use the connection and the established relationship they have to work at it to influence, or have they given up already and they're actually seeing that a lot of what they've tried to do is just falling on deaf ears, and do they go for the radical approach? Now, this could be a localised difficulty, but you saw last Friday at the Unite conference down in Brighton, where for the first time, I think it might have happened before a while ago, probably under the Blair government, but this is a significant move where the members of the Unite Union have voted at a conference to re-evaluate the relationship with the Labour Party. That's huge, not just huge from a political point of view, because that is a whole new sphere of influence which is being redirected. Where do they go? Do they go to Jeremy Corbyn's new left-wing party? Do they look at other new alternatives? Do they try and step back slightly from actual party politics and campaign on issues? But for the Labour Party, it opens up all sorts of threats for them because from the finances. The Labour Party have relied heavily for decades and decades on trade union money coming through and funding central office and individual candidates. And that is going to be a real sore for someone as in the Treasurer's Department at Labour HQ as to how they fill that gap. So yeah, so it could be localised difficulty, but there probably is a trend, and it is definitely a re-evaluation at the moment of what that link and that relationship is. So there's a lot of food for thought for people, a lot of opportunity to look at how you can influence, but also a huge degree of threat and risk for other people that established connection may be fraying.
So it's all about money at the end of the day, and money's in short supply. And if you look at the domestic economies across Europe right now, you know, France, Germany, they've got similar sort of challenges to the UK. There's not enough money to do all the things that the government in those countries and our country wants to do, but the government, in our case, our government, doesn't want to increase taxes any more than it has, but that's looking like that's the way Rachel Reeves is going to have to go right now, because actually the sums just aren't adding up, and all the things she's put in place haven't worked. And obviously money springs to mind because you've just mentioned the Unite Union to date has paid the Labour Party £1 million a year. That's just been steady, baked in revenue for the Labour Party. Without that money, and they wouldn't be re-evaluating their relationship with the Labour Party unless that £1 million a year was in question. So if they do decide, right, actually, the Labour Party has broken its promises and its priorities are so far away from ours now, if they do decide, right, that revenue stream's cut off, that puts Labour in an even more difficult position. And if anything, it cements this divide, which seems to be appearing. So let's get back to Angela Rayner. How do you think her personal handling of it has gone? Because actually what my understanding of what's happened is Unite had their conference. They said we've voted to suspend Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner said, I cancelled my membership months ago. So actually you can't sack me or you can't suspend me because I'm not even there to suspend anymore. So to me that was like a sort of to hell with you.
I thought it was an interesting thing because it's about how that relationship, because obviously when things like this come into the open, it's the only opportunity that we get as observers in these matters to see what's actually going on. It's like peering through the teacher's sort of staff room, isn't it, at school, to find out what's actually going on behind closed doors. And that relationship and the toing and froing obviously is tested at times, it's challenged at times, and also is fruitful, especially on things like Angela's employment rights bill, which is going for at the moment, a piece of legislation which has been heavily lobbied on by trade unions in order to secure more protections and advancement of employers' rights. So that relationship is obviously very good on that side because she's doing a lot of what they want. But then there are some obvious, being in government isn't easy, making decisions isn't easy, being able to prioritise things isn't easy. So as she's trying to now chip away at some of those things which are or not going to be in that bill, the challenges in Birmingham with that direct strike action which has been going on, that is going to have tested the relationship behind closed doors. And then suddenly when it comes to the front of it, well, actually we find out that months ago something must have happened because there must have been a reason. Angela doesn't wake up one day and go, well actually I'm going to resign my Unite membership today for no apparent reason. There's got to be something behind it, something which has been building up over a period of time. And the important thing to remember is that, you look at the Blair years and the Brown years, there are testing times with trade unions, especially when the TUC, etc., and you always see the odd rabble-rousing speech, but when the leaders are always there, because it's their movement, it's their part of it, they should be integral to it all. Whereas this time round, this is only after a year in power. It's only been, this sort of thing should be happening at 5, 6, 7 years in, where you're really being tested about your priorities, where you're matching the funding, where the legislation's going and all the rest of it. But this is only after a single year in office. And I think it's been a lot more difficult for a lot of them than they ever imagined. Remember, many of them had never been in government before. It was a bit like the beginning of the Blair years, to be fair, where they spent so long in the wilderness many of them have forgotten what it's like to be in government, forgotten what it's like to make decisions and based on competing priorities. You know, what's good for the north isn't necessarily good for the south. What's good for Scotland may not necessarily be good for Wales. You know, in different types of constituencies, of which, because there's so many of them, they've got the whole spectrum to consider when making these decisions. So none of that is easy. So they're being tested very early on in that process, and it looks like that testing has already begun to fray that relationship between a very incredibly old and, you could say, successful partnership. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over time. But we're just starting to see now the fragments of fraying and how it's been planning out over the last couple of months. So it'll be interesting for us as observers to see where that goes next.
Yeah, well, Labour just almost exactly a year ago, a few days over a year ago, were elected into power with a manifesto slogan which was "Plan for Change." We've all heard that, capital P, capital C, Plan for Change. It's in all their press releases. But you could say, if you're being harsh, well, actually, there's no change that's happened. So there's two live union issues I can think of at the moment. There's the junior doctors, and Wes Streeting has said, sorry, you've got no public support on this, and in any event, there's no money, so jog on.
Yeah.
And then the other one of note is right here in this city, Birmingham, and it's 30 bin strikers who Angela Rayner is basically accused of saying, well, I'm perfectly happy to side with the council that's going to give you an £8,000 a year pay cut. It's all about money. There's none of it. And to me, it feels like there's two very prominent Labour politicians there. Notably, Angela Rayner is the second most popular in the opinion polls right now, behind Ed Miliband. I was as astonished as anyone by that, but apparently that's true. That's within the parliamentary party. Those two prominent Labour government, or what do you call them, cabinet members, Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner are both saying to workers, jog on, you're not having any money. That's a very sort of un-Labour position to be in, but it's forced upon them by circumstances, i.e. there's no money.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether out of this we see something completely seismic. You know, I'm looking across the water, across the Atlantic to America. Elon Musk is now saying he's going to set up the America Party. He's got the money to do it. I don't think anyone here is proposing anything along those lines. Jeremy Corbyn is ideologically very strong. He lacks the money. But if those unions say, actually, Jeremy Corbyn that's where our values lie. Yeah. What do you think the chances are?
Well, I think, I mean, these things, I'm always a skeptic of third parties and challenger parties, to be honest, because I think that you can't beat the sort of the structure that parties have across the country. You think of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, and even the Liberal Democrats, they have a structure across the country which is well embedded in communities.
But even the Liberal Democrats, they're accused too of basically losing their soul.
Yes,
You know, all of these established parties that have been around so long, it's like they've lost their mojo.
There is definitely an absolute crisis of confidence at the moment in established politics. Whether that heals itself over time, we saw a similar thing in the 80s with the SDP. Remember, they were riding high at one point, getting 49% of the opinion polls. They were going to form the next government, they were winning by-elections, and then suddenly, by the time the 87 election had come around, Thatcher got a bigger majority than she did in 79, I think, from memory. These things ebb and flow all the time, and what tests politicians and what is the measure of their success and how the future pans out for them is how they respond. Do they keep their cool? Are they able to see the bigger picture and the long-term vision and deal with the micro crises as they go along in the short term, with the longer-term image going on with their eye on the goal? Or do they just crumble under the day-to-day crisis management? Now, there's one thing I don't miss about being in Parliament, is that every day was a crisis. You'd walk into the tea room and there was always something going on, someone fretting about the latest announcement on a fund or not fund, something going on in their constituency or something going on in the country. There was always a crisis, and how you manage that and how you're able to maintain relations, that tells you a lot about that individual and about government too. So you were talking about Wes and Angela being pivotal in this at the moment and conflicting with trade unions. If you compare that to Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, who has virtually a direct polar opposite approach to trade unions as they do at the moment, the way she's working with them on private sector involvement, which Wes is quite in favour of in the NHS, Bridget isn't in favour of in education, the arrangements over pay and pensions, etc., two very different proposals from both of them. So the government doesn't appear to have a properly coordinated trade union strategy, which is unusual for a political party, which is based on trade union movement values. So what they've got to try and do is have, this is where leadership comes in, and Keir being there as the leader of the Labour Party primarily, and then Prime Minister, is how you draw together some kind of coherent strategy to manage trade union relations, to manage employee relations, how you set the theme and set the tone of government, and then how that plans out in decision making. That's what's really important. That seems to be what's lacking at the moment, which might be why we get these problems arriving so early on in their parliament.
So I was just thinking about Keir Starmer before you mentioned him, but seeing as you have, he appears to not have the firmest grip on his party. So he had a chancellor that was in tears the week before last. He's got Angela Rayner sort of appearing to just be breaching the whole party's relationship with the unions, not just her own, potentially. He's got, like you've just said, Bridget Phillipson taking a different tack to Wes Streeting. There doesn't appear to be a coherent strategy with the unions that are part and parcel of the Labour movement. So how do you see things panning out for Keir Starmer? There's lots of people, and lots of people say a lot of things, especially in politics. But do you see his grip on the party remaining firm enough for him to stay its leader, or up until the next election?
Well, it's interesting because I remember a couple of weeks ago there were some briefings, and I think these have come directly from Number 10, and it was that Keir had expressed regret over the disability benefits handling in Parliament, because obviously there was that big rebellion, and he'd just come back from the G7. It had been rumbling away for about a week, and the rebels had got highly coordinated and organised, and they successfully delivered a blow to government in order to rein back in some of those welfare changes. And in part of those briefings, it was acknowledged that Keir had become too fixated on international events. He was off to the G7, the NATO Assembly, I think, was on at the same time. There's big things going on in the world with the Trump tariffs, which we were talking about last week, obviously Ukraine and the Middle East as well. Lots of big things going on in the international space. And that is a moment where Prime Ministers can often get their head turned, because this is about being an international statesman. It's one thing being a Prime Minister or a national statesman, but when you're on the world stage, it's a thing that turns the head of Prime Ministers and Presidents when they're being acknowledged and welcomed as a world leader.
It's an ego boost.
Exactly, it's a bit of an ego boost, and it's a way of them trying to cement a sort of legacy in the annals of history. So when Prime Ministers and Presidents start to do that and lose a bit of focus on the ground and on domestic issues, that's when it starts to go a bit pear-shaped. And so one of the things that Number 10 and Keir have got to do is make sure that there's always someone with an eye on the domestic front. Now, realistically, that should be Angela as Deputy Prime Minister. But of course, there's tensions there, because there's always briefings that Angela's got the eye on his job as campaigning behind the scenes.
Even though on TV the other day she said, absolutely not, no. And my first thoughts, as probably a lot of other people's were, was, methinks the lady does protest too much. Which leads me on to another question I have for you, which is, do you think Angela Rayner has got her eye on the leadership? And do you think that in the fullness of time she may even launch a bid to oust Mr Starmer?
I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do that sort of thing in the Labour Party. I remember way back a few years ago when Jeremy Corbyn lost a vote of no confidence but still managed to carry on as the Labour leader. The Labour Party's constitution and the way they do things is a lot more difficult to get rid of leaders than, say, the Conservative Party's one, which, I mean, you can virtually get rid of a leader every other week at the drop of a hat.
And they did.
Yeah, as Boris would say, when the herd moves. And so it's a lot more difficult from a constitutional point of view in the Labour Party. So I don't think she'll try and do a successful coup in that sense, because it's difficult. What we rely on is whether there's a complete loss of confidence in Keir and the Labour Party, which then ultimately forces him out.
How far do you think we are away from that at the moment?
I think we're still quite away. I mean, although Labour MPs are starting to get jittery, a lot of them are starting to look at this now as a one-term prospect rather than something which could be for multiple terms because of the size of their majority. Every week when they're going back home to the constituencies and they're talking to family, friends, locals, community groups, etc., all those people will be going, what's going on? what's happening here, where's the challenges, who are the people that are making these mistakes, how do you get rid of them, how do you try and improve it? And every week they'll be going home and thinking about this sort of stuff and mulling it over. But the good thing is they've got recess coming up as well, so that takes you've got 6 weeks where they'll be doing light touch constituency duties, going to summer fetes and then doing their constituency surgeries, and hopefully, which many of them will need too, is a holiday. Because a lot of them probably won't have had a holiday last summer. They'd have been setting up their offices, it had been non-stop, relentless employing teams, setting up their constituency officer casework, getting used to Parliament. This will be the first opportunity they've had as a proper break.
And actually that's one of the times where I do sometimes feel a tinge of, well, sometimes slightly sorry for politicians, especially like prime ministers and frontline, environment secretaries and whatever, because when they go on holiday, sod's law is there'll be a flash flood or there'll be a wildfire in Yorkshire, and all of a sudden everyone will say, well, where are you? Why are you in the south of France? It's kind of, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I've got sort of 3 questions to close out with. One is, what would your advice be to Keir Starmer in managing Angela Rayner?
Well, the one thing, I don't think it's necessarily managing Angela Rayner, it's managing domestic politics and his own parliamentary party. The problem is the attention has probably gone to Angela a bit, because I should imagine she's probably very good at communicating and socialising and befriending Labour MPs as that person to go to listen to say, yeah, I know, I understand the problems, let's try and work on them together. He's got to do more of that. And apparently there are reports that there's some Labour MPs who even a year in still haven't met him, which is extraordinary when you think of the, but you're supposed to be a team there in person. I mean, his voting record is the worst voting record of a new Prime Minister within a year. I think last
just never there?
Just never there. I think he's voted 9 times or 10 times in the last year out of 300 odd divisions. So you've got to get to know people.
What you say about Angela, you can just imagine, I don't know her, never met her, but you can just see she's gregarious, and she'd probably have a couple of drinks and just be the life and soul.
Absolutely, and she's got a good team around her, a good chief of staff, a good PPS, a private parliamentary assistant, a secretary going out there, liaising with people, getting them to come in and sit down with her, talk about constituency issues, talk about interest issues. That is the sort of thing the Prime Minister should be doing too, to try and make sure that the domestic front is all safe and well and ticking over.
Another question, second to last one. What would your advice be to Angela Rayner in terms of how she handles this rift with Unite Union? Double down? Or get a bit more conciliation?
Well, it's a difficult one to try and judge, I suppose, to them, because on the one hand, you've got a population that probably isn't very overly sympathetic to the more militant side of the trade unions. Lots of people, as I do, like trade unions, think they have a place, the work that they do for individual grievance and discipline, things in the workplace, workers' rights, that's all good stuff, and that should be there and provides a good role.
And you're saying that as a Tory?
Yeah, exactly. It's like
breaking news.
I used to work in HR years ago, and I know the role that they play, and it's important. But at the same time, a lot of people get very frustrated with the party politics element to it, and that's a bit where the public sort of distance themselves a bit more from trade unionism and also the militant side. So Angela's got on one side the internal Labour Party relationship to try and manage, and the finances, and on the flip side an electorate which isn't overly sympathetic.
This is a very good politician's answer here, because I realise you've given me a very eloquent explanation of what's going on, but you haven't answered my question.
No, because
so what should she do? Does she double down, or does she...
Well, that's the point. It's difficult because without us knowing the actual ins and outs of what the relationship challenges are, that's stuff which only you know when you're in the room arguing with people. I think on the Birmingham one, the trade union is obviously wrong, and from a public mentality point of view, she's absolutely got to fight them and come out on the side of Birmingham City Council, as it were, in her own team, and the public, which would be sympathetic to getting the strike action over with and not prolonging it anymore. On the flip side, she does have to maintain that level of relationship with the trade union. Now, she could go in all guns blazing and say, well, it's fine, we do quite much better these days with big, high net worth individuals that donate rather than just relying on trade unions.
Well, there's a lot fewer than there used to be.
Well, yeah, that's true.
There's 1,000 fewer millionaires in the country now. I mean,
the flight of wealth which is going
including
on.
Including that guy, the Pimlico Plumbers guy.
Yeah, he's off.
With the decent haircut.
So it's that difficult thing to do, but I would think from her point of view, she's got to show some grit and that leadership, which I'm sure she's capable of. So falling on the side of the party in this particular instance for the political reasons would probably do well.
So you're saying, Ange, stick to your guns, double down?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And given that she resigned a couple of months ago, purportedly, I reckon she's probably already doing that. That's probably
already the course she's on.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So, final question. You alluded to it in your answer there. The bin strikes. I mean, no one would disagree with the statement. Birmingham Council needs to sort out the bin strike problem because it's an open wound at the moment, and it's been there for I don't even know how long. Feels like 2 years at least. It's just always there, ready to leap up and bite us in the backside. It's reputationally ruinous to this city. Gary Sambrook, you're now boss of Birmingham Council. How are you sorting it out?
Well, the problem, I mean,
bearing in mind you've got a bankrupt council.
Yeah, bearing in mind you've got a bankrupt council, I think you've just got to stick to your guns and plough on. I mean, the council have been in this ridiculous holding pattern for a long time. They would probably argue that they have to go through the ACOS system and all the rest of it. It's true. But this has been going on for years. We've been embattled by equal pay claims and bin disputes for years and years and years. It's just unsustainable. You can't get, I mean, you go down every road in the city when you're commuting on the main artery roads, you look at the hedgerows and the grass verge, it's just full of rubbish wherever you go. It's only really the real close city centre when you go around, you wouldn't know there was a problem. But once you go into some of the suburbs, it's clear as day. I mean, you've just got to be strong-willed, get in there. Apparently the leader's not been in even negotiating meetings. The leader has got to take a personal invested interest in that. Be in there, use your force and your office to be able to convene, to negotiate and get it sorted. And then unfortunately, if they're just going to be that militant, just move on. I mean, I personally would probably privatise the service. It should have been done years ago. You know, if Sandwell Council, which had 72 out of 72 Labour councillors, managed to do it, but I don't see what the problem is with Birmingham. It's just got to be done properly. It's a service which has blighted the council for years. And I remember I was abroad a couple of months ago in Africa and West Africa, and leading the news on BBC World Service was about how dirty my home city was. It's not sustainable to do that. You've just got to go in there, be bold, privatise it and move on, and then hopefully we can all live in a clean city.
Very good. Gary Sambrook sounding a bit more like a Tory in that answer, privatising things. Very good. Good chat.
There we go, great. Yeah,
that was...
Talk Through Walls.
Talk Through Walls with...
Walk Through Walls.
Walk Through Walls.